In the history of country music, there are stories of explosive, youthful genius, artists who arrive like a bolt of lightning and change the world overnight. And then there are other stories, quieter stories, stories of patience, perseverance, and dues paid over decades in smoky bars and on endless highways. These are the stories of the craftsmen, the professionals who show up, do the work, and wait for their moment. Our story today is about one of the finest of them all. In 1974, a song came on the radio that seemed to capture the entire country. It was a simple, sweet story about a wide-eyed country boy meeting a sophisticated city girl. The song was called Country Bumpkin, and its warm, honest, and utterly believable voice belonged to a man named Cal Smith. The song was so huge, winning both the Single and Song of the Year awards, that it made him an instant superstar. But the man behind that overnight success was already in his 40s. He had been a professional musician for over 20 years, standing in the shadows of giants, honing his craft, and waiting for a single song that would finally let the world hear his voice. This isn't the story of a fiery comet. It's the story of a slow, steady burn, the story of a man who proved that sometimes the best things in life are worth the wait. This is the quiet, dignified, and remarkable story of Cal Smith. Calvin Grant Schaffner was born into a world that was breaking apart. The year was 1932. The place was Gans, Oklahoma, and the air itself was thick with a sense of impending doom. The Great Depression had already wrapped its suffocating hands around the nation, but in the Great Plains, a far more visceral and terrifying catastrophe was brewing. This was the dawn of the Dust Bowl era. It began not with a crash, but with a whisper, a persistent dry wind that carried with it the topsoil of 1,000 ruined farms. For a young boy like Cal, the landscape of his earliest memories was not one of green fields and pastoral beauty, but of a world turned a hazy, ominous shade of brown. The dust was a relentless invader. It seeped through the cracks in the walls of their modest home, coating every surface with a fine, gritty film. It worked its way into their food, their water, and their lungs. The sky, once a brilliant blue, would often darken in the middle of the day as black blizzards, apocalyptic, rolling clouds of dust, would descend upon the land, blotting out the sun and turning day into an eerie, suffocating night. This was more than just an economic hardship. It was a psychological trauma. It taught a generation of people that everything they held dear, their homes, their livelihoods, their very connection to the earth, could be snatched away in an instant by forces beyond their control. It bred a unique kind of stoicism, a deep-seated humility that came from staring into the abyss of absolute ruin. There was no room for arrogance or entitlement in a world where the next meal was not a guarantee. This harsh, unforgiving environment was the crucible in which Cal Smith's character was forged. The quiet, unpretentious, and deeply humble man the world would later come to know was a direct product of this time. He learned early on to value the simple things, to appreciate stability, and to understand that a man's worth was measured not by his possessions, but by his resilience and his willingness to work. Like so many hundreds of thousands of their neighbors, the Schaffner family saw the writing on the wall. There was no future left in the dust. Their only hope lay to the west, along the ribbon of highway that led to California, a place they had only heard about in stories and songs, a mythical land of sunshine and opportunity. The journey itself was an ordeal, a slow, uncertain pilgrimage in a packed-in car, joining a long, sad caravan of displaced families. They were part of a mass exodus of humanity, later immortalized as Okies, a term often hurled as an insult. When they arrived in California, settling in the Oakland area, they did not find a promised land, but a new set of struggles. They were outsiders, refugees in their own country, often met with suspicion and prejudice. They took whatever work they could find, laboring in fields and factories, clinging to the tight-knit communities of fellow migrants who understood their plight. This experience of being uprooted and marginalized further solidified Cal's identity as an everyman. He was not born into privilege. He was born into the shared struggle of the American working class. It was in this new world, against the backdrop of the bustling industrial Bay Area, that music began to offer a different kind of escape. For the displaced communities of Oklahomans, Texans, and Arkansans, music was a powerful link to the homes they had left behind. On the weekends, the dance halls and taverns came alive with the sounds of Western, swing, and honky-tonk. This was the music of their people, a sound that spoke of heartbreak, hard work, and the fleeting joys of a Saturday night. For a teenage Cal, these venues were a revelation. He would listen to the swinging, sophisticated fiddle and guitar interplay of Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, a sound that could make even the most tired worker forget their troubles and dance. He would hear the raw, emotionally charged voice of Lefty Frizzell on the jukebox, bending and stretching notes in a way that seemed to reinvent the very language of country music. And he would hear the steady foundational sound of Ernest Tubb, a man whose plain-spoken delivery made every song feel like a true story told by a trusted friend. This was the world Cal wanted to be a part of. He got his first guitar, a simple $17 harmony, and began the painstaking process of teaching himself to play. His early musical education didn't take place in classrooms or studios, but in his own bedroom, trying to mimic the licks he heard on the radio, his fingers fumbling and slowly growing calloused. Music for him was not a hobby. It was a trade, a craft to be learned with the same diligence a carpenter learns to build a house. He began to play at local functions, small gatherings where he could test his skills and build his confidence. Soon, he graduated to the bars. The honky-tonk scene of the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 1940s and early 1950s was not a place for the faint of heart. These were rough, blue-collar establishments, filled with longshoremen, factory workers, sailors on shore leave, and families looking to blow off steam after a long week. The job of a musician in this environment was twofold. First, to play music that people could dance to, and second, to be loud enough to be heard over the din of clinking beer bottles, loud conversations, and the occasional fist fight. For a young Cal Smith, this was his true apprenticeship. Night after night, for hours on end, he stood on small makeshift stages, playing for crowds that were not always attentive and not always sober. He learned how to read a room, how to sense what the dancers wanted, whether it was a fast two-step or a slow, heartbreaking ballad. He learned how to sing with feeling, but also with the stamina required to last a 4-hour set. He learned to play a rock-solid rhythm guitar, the kind of steady, in-the-pocket groove that is the unsung foundation of any great dance band. This wasn't glamorous work. The pay was meager, often just a few dollars, and a share of the tips from a jar on the stage. It was a life of late nights, long drives, and the constant smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap beer. After a tour of duty in the military, he returned to this life, his resolve unbroken. But as the 1950s bled into the 1960s, the years began to add up. Cal was no longer a kid. He was a man in his late 20s, then his early 30s, a husband with a family to support. He watched as other musicians he knew either found a measure of success or gave up the dream entirely, trading their guitars for the stability of a 9-to-5 job. The temptation to quit must have been immense. There were surely nights when he drove home in the pre-dawn hours, his ears ringing and his wallet nearly empty, wondering if this was all his life would ever be. What does it do to a man's spirit to pour his heart into his craft for 15 years, only to remain a local anonymous face? It is in these unchronicled years that the true measure of his character can be found. It takes a special kind of faith and a stubborn, quiet resilience to continue to believe in yourself when the world has given you little reason to do so. He was a professional in the truest sense of the word, a man who showed up and did the work, driven not by the promise of fame, but by a deep, abiding love for the music itself. He was learning, absorbing, and waiting. Every song he sang, every chord he played, was another small deposit in a vast bank of experience. He didn't know it at the time, but he wasn't failing. He was preparing. He was becoming, note by painful note, the artist he was meant to be, ready for a phone call that would finally lead him out of the wilderness and onto a bigger stage than he could have ever imagined. And so, after 2 decades adrift in a sea of professional anonymity, the message in a bottle had finally washed ashore. The quiet dedication, the thousands of hours spent on dimly lit stages, the unwavering belief in his own craft when there was little external evidence to support it, all of it had culminated in this single, life-altering opportunity. For a man who had only known the hard-scrabble world of local honky-tonks, the invitation to join the Texas Troubadours was more than just a step up. It was a passage into another dimension of the music world. It was a call to leave the wilderness behind and enter the hallowed halls of the Nashville establishment, to trade the gritty reality of the bar room for the polished professional world of the Grand Ole Opry. The question was no longer if he would get a break, but what he would do with it. What happens when a man who has spent his entire life learning to survive in the shadows is suddenly asked to stand right next to the sun? With the Troubadours, Smith received an invaluable education. He learned Tubb's core philosophies of consistency, reliability, and immaculate presentation. Life on the road was grueling, but refined his musicianship as he played alongside world-class talents like steel guitarist Buddy Charlton. More than just a guitarist, Smith served as the frontman, warming up the crowd each night and learning the art of connecting with large theater audiences. The most profound lesson came from watching Tubb's legendary humility, as he would sign autographs for hours after every show, instilling in Cal a deep respect for the fans. Despite the security and prestige, Smith grew ambitious. He tired of being in Tubb's shadow and felt a strong desire to launch a solo career. In his mid-30s, this was a monumental gamble. In 1968, he made the difficult decision to leave. The departure was amicable and viewed as a respectful graduation with Tubb's blessing. The experience left Cal Smith as a consummate professional, but it also placed him at a crossroads. Armed with an unparalleled education but facing an uncertain future with no record deal as he set out on his own. With the quiet blessing of the mentor who had taught him everything, Cal Smith stepped away from the only version of success he had ever known. His graduation from the University of Ernest Tubb was complete, leaving him armed with an invaluable degree in professionalism, stagecraft, and the unwritten codes of the road. But as the tail lights of the Texas Troubadours bus disappeared down the highway, they took with them the safety net of a steady paycheck and the immense privilege of a borrowed spotlight. He was now a master craftsman without a workshop, a seasoned veteran forced to start again as a rookie. The city of Nashville, with its intricate hierarchies and unspoken rules, was now the arena for his ultimate test. The education was over. The final exam, far more difficult and with much higher stakes, was about to begin. The challenge was no longer to support a legend, but to become one. In 1968, Cal Smith took a massive gamble by leaving Ernest Tubb's band at age 36 to pursue a solo career in Nashville. His initial years were a struggle. Signed to Cap Records, his music failed to connect as it didn't fit neatly into the polished Nashville sound or traditional honky-tonk. This period was marked by commercial indifference and profound self-doubt. The turning point came when he moved to Decca/MCA Records and partnered with producer Walter Haynes. Haynes recognized that Smith's greatest asset was not vocal power, but his profound believability. Instead of changing him, Haynes built sophisticated Nashville sound productions around Smith's honest voice, ensuring the story and sincerity always remained the focus. This strategy led to their first major hit in 1972, "The Lord Knows I'm Drinking," where Smith's nuanced performance of guilt and resignation resonated with audiences. After scoring his first #1 hit, they recorded Country Bumpkin in 1974. With its charming production and Smith's warm, sincere delivery, the song became a cultural phenomenon and an unstoppable smash hit. The journey culminated at the 1974 CMA Awards, where Country Bumpkin won both Single and Song of the Year. This was the ultimate validation for Smith, cementing his stardom after more than 2 decades of perseverance and finally proving the power of his unique, honest voice. The thunderous applause in the Ryman Auditorium that October night was more than just a sound. It was a verdict. After a journey that had spanned more than 20 years, from the dust-choked fields of Oklahoma to the pinnacle of the Nashville music industry, the long, patient gamble of Cal Smith's life had paid off in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The dream, once a faint and distant glimmer, was now a solid, gleaming trophy in his hands. He had not just found his voice, he had become the voice of the year. But the summit of any great mountain is a precarious place. The relentless, all-consuming climb is replaced by a new challenge: how to navigate the rarefied air of superstardom with grace and integrity. Success doesn't build character, it reveals it. The world now knew Cal Smith the hitmaker. The final, most telling chapter of his story would reveal Cal Smith the man and show how a quiet craftsman handles the profound weight of a long-awaited crown. The moment a lifetime of work is validated in a single brilliant flash of public acclaim is a profoundly disorienting experience. For Cal Smith, standing on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium at the 1974 CMA Awards, holding the trophies for Single and Song of the Year, the thunderous applause must have sounded like the echo of 20 years of silent struggle finally returning to him. He was 42 years old, a man who had spent the majority of his adult life as a road-worn sideman and a struggling hopeful. Now, in the eyes of his peers and the nation, he was a superstar, the voice of one of the decade's most iconic songs. But stardom is not a destination. It is a new and often treacherous landscape. The long, hard climb to the top is one kind of challenge. Learning to navigate the summit is another entirely. For a man as fundamentally humble and private as Cal Smith, the sudden glare of the spotlight would require a new kind of resilience, one that drew upon the same quiet strength that had sustained him through all the years in the wilderness. The music industry has a voracious appetite, and its first question for any new star is always the same: what's next? The pressure to follow up a monumental hit like Country Bumpkin can be crushing. Many artists have crumbled under it, becoming one-hit wonders defined forever by a single song. Cal Smith, however, was not a fluke. He was a seasoned professional, and with his producer Walter Haynes, he went right back to work. His next major single was a masterful strategic choice, a song that showcased a completely different side of his artistry and proved his depth beyond the sweet sentimentality of his biggest hit. The song was It's Time to Pay the Fiddler. And it was the thematic and emotional opposite of Country Bumpkin. Where Bumpkin was a tale of innocent charm, Fiddler was a dark, cautionary narrative about a man whose life of drinking, cheating, and chasing a good time has finally caught up with him, leaving him with nothing but regret. The production was starker, the mood more somber. The central metaphor of a fiddler demanding payment for the dance was a classic country trope, but Cal's performance elevated it to a piece of profound personal drama. He sang it not as a moralizing preacher, but as the man himself, his voice imbued with a chilling sense of self-awareness and despair. You could hear the consequences in his delivery, the weight of a life lived without thought for tomorrow. The song was another smash hit, soaring to #1 on the charts. It was a bold and powerful statement, demonstrating that Cal Smith was not just the singer of a novelty hit, but a master interpreter of the human condition, capable of conveying both its brightest joys and its darkest sorrows. This 1-2 punch of Country Bumpkin and It's Time to Pay the Fiddler cemented his place at the very top of the Nashville hierarchy. More hits followed, like the nostalgic Jason's Farm and the Texas-sized tale of She Talked a Lot About Texas, each one a perfectly crafted piece of storytelling that further solidified his brand of warm, believable country music. With his commercial success firmly established, another honor, perhaps the most meaningful of all, was bestowed upon him. He was invited to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry. For any country artist, this is the ultimate validation. The Opry is more than just a stage. It is a family, a living tradition, a direct lineage back to the very roots of the genre. To be inducted is to have your name etched alongside those of the heroes you grew up idolizing. For Cal, a man who had first stood on that stage as a sideman for his mentor, Ernest Tubb, this moment was the closing of a great circle. It was the fulfillment of a dream that must have seemed impossibly distant when he was a boy in Oklahoma, listening to the Opry's signal crackle through a battery-powered radio. His induction was a recognition not just of his recent hits, but of his entire journey, of his long-standing commitment to the traditions of country music. He accepted the honor with his characteristic humility and became one of the institution's most dedicated and reliable members for the rest of his career, a constant and reassuring presence on its sacred stage. Life as a headliner was a world away from his days on the Troubadours bus. He now had his own name in big letters on the marquee, his own band to lead, and his own tour bus to command. Yet, the lessons learned at the side of Ernest Tubb were deeply ingrained in his professional DNA. He ran his operation with the same quiet authority and unwavering professionalism. His shows started on time, his band was always sharply dressed, and he treated his opening acts with the same respect he had once been shown. Most importantly, he mirrored Tubb's devotion to the fans. After his shows, he would patiently sign autographs and shake hands, his quiet kindness and accessibility becoming as much a part of his reputation as his music. He never forgot the long years when no one was asking for his autograph, and he treated every fan with a genuine gratitude that was all too rare among stars of his magnitude. As Cal was cementing his status as a pillar of the Nashville establishment, a musical and cultural revolution was erupting around him. The outlaw movement had coalesced into a full-blown phenomenon, a direct challenge to the polished, producer-driven Nashville sound that Cal Smith so perfectly embodied. Artists like Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glaser were fighting for and winning the right to control their own music. They recorded with their own road bands, wrote or chose their own songs, and cultivated a rugged, rebellious image that stood in stark opposition to the clean-cut, tuxedo-wearing stars of the Opry. The release of the 1976 compilation album Wanted the Outlaws was a watershed moment. It became the first country album in history to be certified platinum, proving that there was a massive audience for this raw, more personal style of country music. This created a fascinating dichotomy in the genre. On one side, you had the Outlaws, the embodiment of artistic autonomy and anti-establishment swagger. On the other, you had the craftsmen of the Nashville sound, like Cal Smith, who represented the pinnacle of the collaborative studio-based system. It's crucial to understand that this was not a simple case of good guys versus bad guys. It was a clash of two valid but fundamentally different artistic philosophies. The Outlaws believed that true authenticity came from an artist's singular, unfiltered vision. Cal Smith and his contemporaries believed that authenticity could be found in a perfectly written song, performed by a gifted interpreter and polished to perfection by the finest musicians and producers in the world. He was a believer in the genius of the system, the genius of songwriters like Don Wayne, the genius of producer Walter Haynes, and the genius of the A-Team session players. Cal never engaged in the public feuds or the philosophical debates. He simply continued to do his work. While Waylon was singing "Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way," questioning the state of modern country music, Cal was in the studio cutting another beautifully crafted story song. He did not change his style to chase the outlaw trend, nor did he publicly criticize it. He remained true to his own artistry, a calm and steady center in a swirling storm of change. His response was not one of defiance, but of quiet confidence. He was a master of his craft, and he saw no reason to abandon the methods that had, after so long, brought him so much success. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, the landscape of country music continued to shift. The Urban Cowboy craze brought a new pop-infused sound to the forefront, followed by the new traditionalist movement led by young stars like George Strait and Randy Travis, who looked back to the honky-tonk roots that both Cal and the Outlaws had drawn from. Cal's string of chart-topping hits became less frequent. While he continued to record and tour, he made a conscious decision to step back from the relentless pursuit of the next hit record. He and his wife Darlene relocated to the quieter, more relaxed atmosphere of Branson, Missouri. Branson had become a haven for veteran entertainers, a place where they could perform for loyal, appreciative audiences without the pressures of the Nashville industry. It was a perfect fit for California. It allowed him to continue to do what he loved, singing for people, but on his own terms, in a stable and comfortable environment. His life in Branson was a quiet one, a well-earned reward for a lifetime of hard work. He was a devoted family man, fiercely protective of his private life. He indulged in his passions for fishing and playing cards with his friends. He still enjoyed flying his own small plane, finding a sense of peace and solitude in the open sky. He remained a fixture at the Opry, making the drive to Nashville to fulfill his duties as a member. But his days of chasing the charts were over. He had climbed the mountain and was now content to enjoy the view. When he passed away in 2013 at the age of 81, the country music world mourned the loss of one of its most respected and beloved elder statesmen. To assess the legacy of Cal Smith is to understand the profound difference between an artist and a craftsman. In a genre that lionizes its rebels and its revolutionaries, his legacy is a quieter but no less significant one. He was not a songwriter who bled his own autobiography onto the page like Hank Williams or Willie Nelson. He was instead a master interpreter, a vocal actor who could take a story written by someone else and inhabit it so completely that it felt like his own. His genius was in his subtlety, his phrasing, and his absolute sincerity. He was a musical craftsman of the highest order, and his records are a testament to the timeless power of that craft. His life story itself remains his most powerful legacy. It is the ultimate tale of perseverance, a narrative that offers hope to anyone who has ever felt that their dream was slipping away. To labor for 20 years in obscurity, to face constant rejection and indifference, and to maintain an unshakable faith in your own talent is a feat of character that is perhaps more remarkable than any hit record. His journey is a quiet but powerful rebuke to our modern culture of instant gratification. Cal Smith is the patron saint of the late bloomer, a permanent reminder that it is never, ever too late. In the final analysis, his importance is found in the sound of his voice. It was a voice that conveyed a fundamental kindness. It was warm, approachable, and utterly without artifice. In a world that was becoming increasingly cynical and complex, his voice was a refuge, a sound that felt honest and true. When you listen to a Cal Smith record today, whether it's the innocent charm of Country Bumpkin or the weary regret of It's Time to Pay the Fiddler, you are hearing more than just a great singer. You are hearing the accumulated wisdom of a life lived with humility, dignity, and an unwavering respect for the power of a simple, well-told story. His place in the great pantheon of country music is secure, not for the noise he made, but for the quiet, unshakable truth he brought to every single song he sang.